to meet at the Band Shell and Festival Park at 9 a.m. Dress accordingly, as we will be outside working. If anyone is interested, we're talking about maybe going to lunch afterwards. So Faith in Action is offering some cool new First U t-shirts for people to wear at this event or for future events. The t-shirts are going to be from Rust Head Printing in Valpo. They are recycled and made in a fair trade factory in Haiti. If you are interested in purchasing a shirt, let me know. I will be here at the church on the 22nd that morning prior to the cleanup day if you would like to come pick up a shirt to wear that day. It says First Unitarian NWI, faith is an action word, and then it has First Unitarian Church of Hobart under that. So then if you are still feeling thirsty after all of that park cleanup, Faith in Action invites everyone to a fun event at Portage Earth Day Brewfest. That is also April 22nd at the Open Air Pavilion in Portage. There will be unlimited beer, wine, and cocktail tastings, and live music, and food trucks. So that's from 2 to 6 p.m. Tickets are $45 on Eventbrite if you drink ahead of time. If you do not drink and are a designated driver, they're only $10. So that's a fun thing for everybody to do to get together. The proceeds go to the Portage Parks Department. Barb also has an announcement.
Are all of those things in our upcoming by chance, or will they be?
I will try to get them in for the next upcoming, and I will put them on Tracy's Facebook.
I got to remember them all. Thank you.
Good morning, everybody. I just want to remind you that May 12th and 13th, we're having a plant sale. So now is the time to start planting your seeds and putting them in the windows so you could bring them to the plant sale. And we'll be taking everything, all plants, anything to do with garden or plants. Maybe you've got old tools you don't need anymore, garden decorations, anything that has to do with in or outdoor plants, and we're hoping to get a lot of outdoor plants this year. So you gardeners, start your seeds now. Thank you.
We are a religious community of people with diverse beliefs and shared values. Our diverse beliefs are expressed in our 6 sources, and our shared values are expressed in our 7 principles. Both can be found online at uua.org. Together we strive to grow spiritually, build community, and live our values in the world. Oh, sorry, Brian, come on.
Good morning, Brian Porter, the chair of the Finance Committee. So today is supposed to be the last day of our annual pledge drive. So if you haven't been contacted by anyone from the congregation, probably from the board, should be more specific, feel free to come up to myself. Sandy's here today, Barb is here. I don't see any other board members at this point, but we're trying to wrap it up so at the next board meeting, they can see what our income is looking like, what our expenses are looking like, and we got a lot going on, a lot planned for next year, so increasing your pledge is always happily received, and I thank those of you that have already gotten your pledges in, but if you've got any questions, again, see myself, Sandy, or Barb today, and we will talk with you, so thank you.
We are currently streaming our services online. The Joys and Sorrows portion of our service is private, and we will take a break from streaming during that portion of the service. Other than that, the service will be recorded and will be available for future viewing on Facebook, YouTube, and the church website. Wearing masks is optional right now, but if you are feeling ill or think you have contact with anybody who had COVID, then please attend virtually. Please let your Facebook and Twitter friends know you are attending worship with hashtag First Unitarian Hobart. Now please silence your devices, take a couple deep breaths, and join us in a spirit of reverence.
We gather this hour as people of faith with joys and sorrows, gifts and needs. We light this beacon of hope, sign of our quest for truth and meaning in celebration of the life we share together.
Please open your gray hymnals to number 623. I'll read the stuff that I'll read the first and you'll read the italicized. On the first day of the week, at early dawn, they came to the tomb, saying, they looked up and saw that the stone had already been rolled back, and on the right they saw a young man. They were alarmed, but the man said to them, "Why do you seek the living among the dead?" So they went out and fled from the tomb, for terror and amazement had seized them, and they said nothing, for they were afraid.
Please rise for the opening hymn and by your spirit for number 108, My Life Goes On in Endless Song.
Thank
please continue standing and join with me in the recitation of the affirmation of faith printed on the screen and also in the order of service. Love is the doctrine of this church. The quest for truth is its sacrament. Service is its prayer. And this is our covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in love, and to help one another. And as we continue to stand, we will greet each other, remembering our COVID protocols, so we stand in place and wave and smile and give a big greeting to everybody.
Please be seated. This morning, as each Sunday morning, we invite the sharing of joys or sorrows that are on your heart, that you brought with you into this space, that are arising with you in this moment. In between Sunday to Sunday, so much happens within our own selves, within our families, our communities, in the wider world. And some of it sticks. Some of it feels challenging to bear, and some of it is delightful to bear. And so we invite you to bring that into this space, to offer it and to share it together. And so if you have something that you'd like to share, I can come up to you at the microphone. I would just ask that you share your name with us so that we know who you are. Does anybody have a joy or sorrow? Yes, I see somebody over here. that has been shared. The gratitude booming in from the street outside, that we may continue to weave the fabric of this community into ever more beautiful patterns. So in the order of service this morning, it lists a story called Feeding the Many. It's actually two stories put together, and then there'll be a little reading after it. The first story is from the book of 2 Kings. It has a couple parts to it. When the prophet Elisha returned to Gilgal, there was a famine in the land. As the company of prophets was sitting before him, he said to his servant, "Put the large pot on and make some stew for the company of prophets." And one of them went out into the field to gather herbs, and he found a wild vine and gathered from it a lapful of wild gourds, and came and cut them up into a pot of stew, not knowing what they were. And they served some for the men to eat. But while they were eating the stew, they cried out, "O man of God, there is death in the pot." They could not eat it. And he said, "Then bring some flour." And he threw it into the pot and said, "Serve the people and let them eat." And there was nothing harmful in the pot. And then a man from Baal Shalishah, bringing food from the first fruits to the man of God, 20 loaves of barley and fresh ears of grain in a sack. Elisha said to him, "Give it to the people and let them eat." But his servant said, "How can I set this before 100 people?" And so Elisha replied, "Give it to the people and let them eat. For thus says the Eternal, they shall eat and have some left." He set it before them, and they ate, and they had some left, according to the word of the Eternal. And then the second story from the book of Luke. On their return, the apostles told Jesus all they had done. And then taking them along, he slipped quietly into a city called Bethsaida. When the crowds found out about it, they followed him, and he welcomed them and spoke to them about the kingdom of God and healed those who needed to be cured. And the day was drawing to a close, and 12 came to him and said, "Send the crowd away, so that they may go into the surrounding villages and countryside to lodge and get provisions, for we are here in a deserted place." But he said to them, "You give them something to eat." And they said, "We have no more than 5 loaves Moses heard the message, "Get out," and left. And in the second story, a man of the wilderness who has offered his followers the ecological teachings of the wilderness, to live again like birds and flowers, entrusting ourselves to the earth, enters the heart of empire and is almost immediately tortured and executed by those in power. Can empire be reformed? Not only will Jesus be murdered, but his very teachings will be twisted into the foundation of a new, more terrible empire yet, that will unleash a whole new kind of religious violence upon the earth. Did anyone whisper, "Get out," to Jesus in the garden that night? Why do I think any number of the women in his life almost certainly did? How do we get out of the mess we are in? 2,000 years later, there is almost no wilderness left. It is hard to know where to go or how to go there anymore. What rivers do we need to step into? What manna could possibly feed us? Hasn't Rome spread out across the earth, bringing its violence and its materialism disguised as progress and improvement to every corner of the globe? This is the question I take with me into this week. How to help Moses stay in the wilderness. How to help Yeshua return to it. How to help the wilderness itself become our home instead of our empire. Our home instead of empire. How to recover the wilderness within me and without. Our ancestors have given these stories to us to guide us, not to accommodate empire and its myriad of atrocities, but to remind us to get out. How will we do that at this time and in this place? Only with the help of those ancestors who I am calling upon this week. So ends our reading. I invite you to rise in body or spirit and join in our song, "Hold Everybody Up."
One's not in the hymnals, we will have the words projected on the screen, and insert the order of service. It's a call and response, so I'll sing a line and then we can all join in. And be fun. Here we go. Hold everybody up.
the 6th week of this series about money and economics, and last week in our exploration of the parable of the talents, we looked at how there's this ideology that we face in our society that says, you must play the game perfectly or your suffering is justified. You must play the game perfectly or your suffering is justified. It's so pervasive and deeply rooted that many who identify themselves as Christians have actively twisted Jesus' teachings to say the opposite of what they clearly mean. Twisting, for instance, a parable in which the bad guy is the rich landlord who's extracting the material resources of the poor to fuel his own wealth, into a claim that the rich landlord is a god who vindictively insists that his followers look out for themselves above all else. Which is not to say that it's an intentional or Machiavellian interpretation. I would guess that it's genuine, that there's a sense of this is just how things are. Because the ideology in which we all swim steers us in that direction. Whether or not we identify ourselves as Christians, that is the water that we are all swimming in. For some, the whole Christian package has become so tainted by this misuse over the centuries that it seems unrecoverable. And others feel dedicated to come back to precisely what has been used to anchor such harmful theology, to get at the source and uproot it. On either of these paths, when one approaches any sort of sacred text from a universalist perspective, these sorts of harmful theologies tend not to thrive. When we're focused on how we're lifting people up as opposed to putting them in their place, it gets harder to get sucked into those dominant ideologies. The universalist lens that is our heritage tends to cut those off at the root because that ideology of you must play the game perfectly or your suffering is justified is such an easy, familiar go-to. And recognizing the idea of justified suffering as being morally bankrupt brings other theologies to the surface. The parable of the talents can be read not just to justify the suffering of a slave, but rather to show how refusing to play along in perpetuating the oppression of others tends to result in a different sort of experience. But it's a really tough thing to do on one's own. As a community of faith, it becomes easier to do it together. One of the many things that I am grateful for in my life is that I'm not prone to most of the addictions that are on offer. I've never particularly had a taste for alcohol. I've been drunk 2 times in my life. I like a good wine cooler on occasion, or mudslides are quite tasty. But it's just not really the thing that I do for fun. So I've never felt like I've been drawn to the path of alcoholism, and I feel grateful for that. I've never felt drawn to the addiction to cigarettes or tobacco. My dad smoked my whole life, and it smelled terrible, and I would hear him waking up coughing in the morning, and so I definitely was not interested in going down that path at all. When I've had surgery and I've had to take opiates afterwards, it can be a little fun for a little while, but pretty soon I'm like, this feels kind of gross, I want to stop taking it. So I just feel fortunate that none of those usual things have been tempting to me. But sugar, on the other hand, I grew up in a house where we didn't have sugar cereals. There was an amount of sugar per serving that was allowed for us to buy the box of cereal and bring it into the home, and it was like 6 grams of sugar per serving. So not particularly sweet. So the sweetest sugar that I had at home was like grape nuts. But when I would go to my grandparents, that rule was not in place. And so there was Lucky Charms, and there was Fruity Pebbles, and there was Captain Crunch. and all these amazing sugar cereals. And then I would go back home to my place with my mom, and she would refuse to buy it for me, and I didn't really have very much money at the time. And so I would try to recreate the experience. I would get the cornflakes, and I would pour the sugar on top. And so I'd have this bowl that I would slowly get down to the bottom, and then there'd be the mound of sugar on the bottom of the bowl. It didn't quite get absorbed into everything else. So I was trying to get my sweet tooth fix wherever I could. And then when I got to college, I was living in the dorms at the Evergreen State College in Olympia, Washington, and the vast majority of the dorms at that school have their own kitchen. So only one building doesn't have kitchens, and so you're automatically on the meal plan. We had our own kitchen. I could make my own food. I went on weekly grocery trips, and I discovered a new respect and appreciation for the bakery section at the grocery store. See, they have these things called lemon poppy seed ring cakes. And I would go on my weekly grocery run, and I would come across one of those, and I'd be like, you know what? I could make myself dinner, or I could just have this for dinner. And that fed into more of the cycle, and I would go around the aisles. What are all the things that I would have loved to have had at home that now that I have total control over what I buy for myself? What would I like to do? And so I started up a habit of drinking 2 liters of Dr. Pepper every day. There is sugar so many places in our society. Entire aisles of grocery stores and convenience stores stocked to the brim with nothing but sugar delivery devices. A couple of years ago, I tried out an experiment of adopting a ketogenic diet. So for those of you who don't know what a ketogenic diet is, it's sort of the opposite of what you're told is healthy. The default healthy thing is you're supposed to eat complex carbohydrates and lots of vegetables and minimize your fat intake. A ketogenic diet, you get the vast majority of your calories from fat, specifically. And when I first heard about this, I thought, that is ridiculous. Why would anybody do that? But I was persuaded. And so I tried being keto for 2 months. And the rules are you're not allowed to eat more than 10 to 20 grams of carbohydrates in a day. And you get to 10 to 20 grams of carbohydrates pretty easy with some vegetables, if you're eating vegetables. And my main takeaway from that, from my break from all this sugar, after not eating sugar for a whole month, trying it for a little bit for a few days, and then taking another month off of it, was that the number one impact of me eating the sugar was wanting more sugar. That was the main biological response that my body had. It was like, oh, more of that. Yes, please. More than the pleasure, more than the enjoyment, that was the number one thing. And the only way that I could notice that was because I had taken that break. I'd gotten a little bit of sugar sobriety for a month to see things afresh. Me trying out this keto diet lasted a couple of months. I decided it wasn't for me, but that learning that I carry with me from it has been so valuable. Our perspectives from the water that we're swimming in can be corralled and sucked into seeing things in a normal way where we lose track of, oh, how does this actually feel in my body? What is my actual response in this society? What actually feels true and right and good and valuable? When we're in a group of folks, keto was kind of trendy at the time, so I got to ride that little trendiness with some group of friends of mine. When we have that social support, it becomes possible to do things that might be much harder as an individual. That's why some folks take classes, because I know that reading books in a class is going to happen way easier than it's going to happen if they just try to read a stack of books on their own. Or meditating regularly as part of a Sangha, that they know doing that on your own is going to be way harder. Or handling alcoholism with the support of a 12-step program. When we gather together to accomplish these things, so much more becomes possible than if we are trying to do it on our own. The basic assumption in our society that we should be able to handle all this stuff on our own is ridiculous. So often, when we talk about money in our society, it's from that individual perspective. But economics is not an individual thing. It's a discipline that is specifically about larger systems of which we're all a part. And just like addictions, there are trends and temptations and overarching flows of goods and services and capital that go way beyond us as individuals. And so in this series, we've been looking at what one might call Sabbath economics, or an economy of grace. And one of the main points is that the economics in the Bible aren't some small sideline, but rather a core feature. On this Easter Sunday, the day on which many Christians around the world celebrate the resurrection of Jesus after a few days of lying dead in a tomb, it's worth remembering why Jesus was killed in the first place. In the words of scholar Marcus Borg, how he put it in his book, The Heart of Christianity, and Jesus was killed. This is one of those facts that everybody knows, but whose significance is often overlooked. He didn't simply die, he was executed by established authority. And if we ask the historical question, why was he killed? The historical answer is because he was a social prophet and a movement initiator, a passionate advocate for God's justice and radical critic of the domination system who had attracted a following. If Jesus had only been a mystic or a healer or a wisdom teacher, he almost certainly would not have been executed. Rather, he was killed because of his politics. And so in the story of the loaves and the fishes, we get to see what that politics looks like, how it plays out. But there's a stumbling block in it. We Unitarian Universalists tend to be pretty rational folk. And when we read about supernatural miracles in ancient texts, it can kind of snap us out, and what do we do with this, and what's the spiritual message, and what was actually going on, and what's the true thing, and we can start to work our way around in weird, twisty patterns. Modernity is this period in history in which that rational frame of mind is so important, and so it gets harder to listen to the story as one might have a couple millennia ago. In the story, the sun is going down. There's a huge crowd that's gathered around them in the wilderness. And the disciples are urging Jesus, we should really send people into the nearby villages so they can get fed. It's a rational, practical response to the situation. And Jesus' answer to them is blunt. You give them something to eat. And the disciples fret over the situation. They try to figure out what the heck they're going to do about it. And Jesus takes action. He distributes the food. The only supernatural thing that happens in the story is the part about people being satisfied from how much they ate. The rest of it, the desire of the disciples to come up with what seems like a practical solution, Jesus' insistence that the disciples instead take action themselves, Jesus stepping in to do what he had told them to do, distributing the food, none of that part is supernatural. And the story also echoes older stories. In the first week of this series, the story of the Hebrews having just left Egypt, being in the desert, having enough manna for all to eat, is just like the story of the loaves and the fishes. The focus is not on the miraculous. The focus is on gathering people together in a way where there's enough to go around. Our first story this morning of the prophet Elisha, first purifying a pot of stew and then feeding 100 people, also involves a food miracle, and it takes place during a time of famine. And as biblical scholar Ched Myers points out, in the Bible, a famine doesn't just mean that there's an unfortunate natural disaster. It's also a result of human economic systems of greed. Natural cycles of nature only turn into social disasters because of political and economic conditions of exploitation. And Elisha encounters a scene in which the local people, driven to desperation by economic breakdown, are forced to return to the ancient ways of hunting and gathering to survive. But those folks no longer have the competence in the traditional ways, since sustainable local economic cultures had been destroyed. So the desperate peasants gather gourds that are inedible. And Elisha heals this pot of stew and spreads the food around to all those in need. The story of the Hebrews surviving on manna in the wilderness lays the first stone, this prioritizing everyone having enough. The story of Elisha healing the pot of stew and getting the people fed during the famine reinforces those same priorities. The story of Jesus organizing things so that all those gathered around him have dinner reinforces this again. And this same story is narrated not once, but twice in both the book of Matthew and the book of Mark. So clearly, with all this repetition, there is an importance to this theme of having enough to go around. In each of these stories, there's a situation in which it seems like there's not enough to go around, which is ultimately an economic issue. But there are some resources available, and people rally together. In Meyer's words, both Elisha's world and Jesus' world are characterized by widespread hunger and poverty that resulted from a feudal system of land ownership and from an extractive economic system that benefited the urban elite while disenfranchising the rural poor. And in that context, economic practices of enough and then some for everyone were and are miraculous. And then later, after Jesus' death, the book of Acts describes how Jesus' followers put that economics of enough into practice by sharing their possessions. One of the challenging aspects of addiction, like I was saying, is how it twists our perceptions of the world around us. When people have food addictions, it becomes hard to relate to food as simple nourishment. When people have drug addictions, it starts to warp relationships with other people. When people have any kind of addiction, what seems like a good idea and what seems like a bad idea on a moment-to-moment basis can start to go sideways. The reason that it's so helpful to get support from and give support to others when trying to battle addiction is that it's an antidote to those skewed perceptions. So here's another antidote. When we imagine a world of equality and dignity for all, what questions does that lead us to ask of both our present world and our own lives? Does it lead you to ask, why is our world not one of equality and dignity for all? What would a world of equality for all look like? How would it work? What would a world of dignity for all look like? And how would that work? Why is our world not one of equality and dignity for all? What is in the way? What collective societal addictions have us in their grasp? And how might we get support from one another and give support to one another in overcoming those societal addictions? Last week, in exploring the parable of the talents, the story ended with the slave master directing his underlings to throw one of the slaves into the outer darkness, where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. Often that parable is taught as if the slave master is the stand-in for God and the slave is a stand-in for the sinful folk who don't use their talents as God had hoped. But in looking more closely at the parable, it seems like the slave master was actually not a model for good behavior. And that what seems like the outer darkness to the slave master might actually be a place of hope and promise for the rest of us. Might actually be where we all have some hope of sitting at the welcome table. In our reading by Perdita Finn this morning, she prompts, when the Hebrews found themselves enslaved and threatened with violence as a series of climatological plagues descended upon them, Moses heard the message, "Get out," and left. And in the garden in which Jesus wrestled with his fate, did anyone whisper, "Get out," to Jesus in the garden that night? How do we get out of the mess we're in? How do we recover the wilderness within us and without? And Christian blogger Mike Morrell adds to Finn's invitation to sink deep roots into our original participation with life by writing, "I'm not sure if we can simply head back to the wilderness again, given that, as Perdita notes, there is vanishingly little wilderness left. But we can aim toward a renewed earth of restored harmony between humanity and the rest of creation through cooperation and co-creation of something new." Moses and Miriam, Yeshua and Mary Magdalene, they knew the way forward was through. May everything we release in this season, we're just coming out of Lent, may everything we release become compost for a world of equality and dignity for all that is already a seedling of possibility. And so my invitation to you over this coming week is to take some steps to grow that seedling of possibility within you and among us. So each time that you sit down for a meal, so for those of you who eat 3 meals a day, that's 21 times between now and next week. For those of you who are doing intermittent fasting, it might be just 7 or something along those lines. Whatever diet plan you're doing, whenever you sit down to a meal, just ask yourself, in a world deeply divided between the haves and the have-nots, how might you embody an ethic of equality? In a world deeply divided between the haves and the have-nots, how might you embody an ethic of equality? And when you imagine that world of equality and dignity for all, what questions does it lead you to ask of both our present world and your life? What questions does it lead you to ask of both our present world and your life? And then talk with one another about this. Bring it from the individual into the collective wrestling with these questions. Let us not be seized by the terror and amazement of looking at how awful things already are in some ways. May we hear the real, though far off hymn that hails a new creation through all the tumult and the strife. May we still hear the music that is ringing, that sounds an echo in our souls. May we hold everybody up. May we circle round for freedom and peace. May we be lured to fresh schemes of life, roused from tiredness or self-pity, fired with passion to restore the love of living in ourselves and within each other. And may that ever be so.
Now is the time in our service for our offering. We give to remind ourselves of how many gifts we have to offer. We give to remember that we are part of something bigger than ourselves. We give because we believe in music and friendship. We give with the faith that together we have enough. The money in the baskets goes to sustaining the mission of our community. The money in the cups goes to our Faith in Action ministry and a different charity chosen by the ministry every month. This month, the money from the cups goes to the Self-Injury Support Group of Northwest Indiana. For those not here with us today, there is an online link on the screen for both one-time and regular donations. And if I could get 4 volunteers, thank you.
go round for freedom. We'll sing this one three times together in unison.
Closing words are in your hymnal number 624 by Clark Dewey Wells. God of Easter and infrequent spring, announce the large covenant to deceitful lands. Drive the sweet liquor through our parched veins. Lure us to fresh schemes of life. Rouse us from tiredness, self-pity. Whet us for use. Fire us with good passion. Restore in us the love of living. Bind us to fear and hope again.
extinguishes flame, but not the light of truth, or the warmth of community,